Well, and now for something completely different. I am not a researcher. I'm not on faculty here. I work for a company called Weather Underground, which I was the co-founder of back in 1995 here at the University of Michigan. I have a PhD in air pollution meteorology, but before then I was a hurricane hunter. I spent 4 years flying with NOAA's hurricane research team down out of Miami and flew into a bunch of hurricanes, including a couple Category 5s. So my main job now, I write a blog for this Weather Underground. You can see my address is wonderground.com/cat6. That's my blog. And I do talk a lot about hurricanes, and I talk a lot about climate change as well. So I'm going to talk to you about civic engagement, which is pretty much my 100% job, talking about hurricanes. And we'll focus today on adaptation to one particular threat of hurricanes, and that is higher storm surges. Here we have an example from October of this past year. This is Mexico Beach in the Panhandle of Florida after Hurricane Michael. There was a 19-foot storm surge that came through and pretty much cleared out a 6-block area of this beachfront community because it wasn't designed to withstand a storm surge of that magnitude. All except for one house. We call this the super house. It was raised up and built way above code, in fact against both the winds and the storm surge, and it survived. And this has been pointed out maybe as a good example of adaptation to increased storm surge threat from hurricanes. Well, I'm going to show that maybe that's not quite the case and bring up 4 ways we can adapt to stronger hurricanes with higher storm surges. And we do expect hurricanes to get stronger in future decades. We can't say for sure yet that's already happening. But Hurricane Michael, 4th strongest hurricane on record to make landfall in the U.S., 155-mile-an-hour winds. Boy, that sure was a wake-up call for a lot of people. We had another storm last year over in Japan. It was the strongest landfalling typhoon on the main island of Honshu since 1992. It was 110-mile-per-hour winds, borderline Category 2, Category 3 storm. And it flooded the 3rd largest airport in Japan. It brought about 9 or 10-foot storm surge. The seawall over this artificial island, which they built at an expense of $10 billion in the last couple of decades, was overtopped, and the storm surge flooded in and shut down the airport for 17 days. And I'm going to read you a quote here from the airport's website. It said, "The construction of water barriers around the entire airport island was completed in 2006. This effectively eliminated rising water levels on the island, even in the event of abnormal tides and typhoon surges. In fact, this solution eliminated problems affecting airport functions irrespective of sea level increases due to prolonged global warming and long-term ground settlement." Well, oops. Didn't quite work out that way. So, okay, like I said on the previous slide, we need to stop building in vulnerable areas, or if we do, make sure that the defenses are a lot stronger. LaGuardia Airport in New York is another airport that is way too low. It's about 7 feet above sea level. It got flooded during Hurricane Sandy. They have $4 billion worth of improvements scheduled to go for building that to a higher standard. I think that's $4 billion not well spent. Okay, so how do we protect our airports? Well, we can build a wall to keep out storm surge. In fact, this has been done in 3 cities in the New England area. New Bedford, Stamford, and Providence all have storm surge barriers built in response to hurricane surges back in 1938 and 1954 that caused tens of millions of dollars of damage. Now, you can't build a wall everywhere. You can't build one in Miami because it's built on porous bedrock. The water will just come up through the bedrock. You probably shouldn't build one in Boston. They came up with a study showing that it didn't make sense. But you probably should build one in Houston to close off the Houston ship channel there, and possibly in Tampa Bay as well. Okay, we don't have to necessarily build these big barriers that, wall off entire harbors. You can take a combination approach like New York City is doing. This is actually a flood wall here, a levee, that is lining the side of the East River, and they make it a green space as well, but it's really acting as a storm surge barrier. They're also doing some work to put in more marshlands to protect storm surge naturally, and they're raising streets and sewers and things like that in the city to make sure that it won't flood as often. Okay, back to my first slide, I said, hey, you know, why not build a super home to do adaptation? Well, the problem with building a super home is, yeah, you can defend it better against a storm surge, but if that super home is built on a barrier island, that whole barrier island is going to disappear in time due to sea level rise. In fact, here's an example here, a barrier island off the coast of Alabama that 10 times since 1979 has gotten inundated, and these 400 homes here have now earned about $200,000 per home in our taxpayer money to rebuild them and put the infrastructure back on those islands. So that's a pretty expensive investment we as taxpayers are making for these sometimes second homes for rich people that are out there. So the final solution, which is ultimately what we're going to have to do in a lot of places because we're not being very smart about this, is to retreat. Now we should do it in a strategic and organized fashion like we did with the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse back in 1999. They moved it back away from the ocean, and it was actually very successful. People were worried about losing tourism dollars, but it ended up being the right thing to do. Well, they're going to have to do it again in probably 50 or so years because they haven't moved it back far enough. But retreat is really the only solution in a lot of places that we don't have big built-up urban areas. So with that, next speaker.